and welcome to the very first episode of the Fractional Forum. Say hi, everybody. Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Hi, everybody.
That was not planned at all. That's just Tracy randomly prompting people. All right. Well, we're super excited for everyone to join us today for this very first exercise. It's an exercise and an episode. Do you guys see what I did there? I tend to make up words. These guys are going to learn a lot about me in this very first episode. The first episode of the Fractional Forum. But what, might you ask, is the Fractional Forum? Well, the Fractional Forum is an opportunity for business people, specifically business owners, to kind of try on some ideas from their business for their business problems from a bunch of different perspectives. So as you might see or hear today, we have a whole bunch of different quote unquote departments that are represented, and we have some amazing fractional resources that are joining us for the conversation today. And we're going to be discussing business problems. So we have a very specific business problem for today. But before we even get started, I want to share with everyone that did you know that you could get your business problem into the show and get all of these brains working on your business problem as part of the Fractional Forum? Because if you didn't, we will share a link of how you can apply for that at the end of the show. So you can kind of think about what's on the top of your list and how might some interdepartmental fractional resources be able to give you some very useful advice on those things, which we will be demonstrating for you today. We're going to go. So I think what we'll do, because we have so many of us on the panel here today, as we kind of take on our perspective of the business channel, just do a little bit of an intro to yourself so people get what your background is and the perspective that you're coming from. But I'd like to jump right into the problem today. So I'm going to read it off my phone because I did not memorize it because that would be ridiculous. So we have an acting COO who has shared with us that they were hired as an individual contributor for a 6-year-old profitable ad tech company. They now have 6 direct reports and 10 dotted lines. They need to hire 5 people by January 2nd. I mean, that's not that far in the future. The team that reports to them includes account managers who do not have clear job descriptions or responsibilities. They have to do account management, sales planning, and sales administration. Some of the things they've tried historically is to resolve this with policy, process, and procedure. There's also marketing reporting into this person. There's a lot of details here. You guys are writing this down.
I'm trying here.
This is what we have in business, right? Complex problems. Okay, so an app handles HR. There are no job descriptions, and performance evaluations are at the end of the year. They originally offered unlimited PTO. They felt one person abused it. They changed it to 2 weeks of PTO and 2 sick days. The majority of staff are Gen Z and millennials. So, I mean, let's be honest. Do we ever have all of the information when we're solving problems? Generally, no. But this is a solid amount of information for us to get started on today. I'm just going to quickly go over to Tim because, Tim, I know this came in through you. So is there anything else in terms of framing of the problem that you know that you think would be helpful for the conversation today?
Thanks, Tracy. Tim Duthie. I'm looking after sales. I work with organizations to transform their approach to sales and deal with change. So this company, they're small. There's about 50 people employed with this company. So it sounds like most of them report to the person that I know. I don't know if there's many left that don't. And one of the things that they shared with the HR piece is that this is really falling flat, this particular change on PTO, because the majority staff want flexibility and want to have life. And that was a major concern with this change in the PTO policy, was the lack of that flexibility.
I mean, this is something I feel like has been pretty common since COVID. And yep. So let's default to our resident HR peep, Vered. What are your initial thoughts here?
I have so much to add to this. This is a juicy one. I'm Barry Levant, and I own a firm, fractional firm called MEHR. We've been in business for 8 years. So I'm obviously representing the HR hat in our forum. There's a lot here, and I think a lot of organizations, what I find is they go full speed, they start to scale and grow, and not really thinking about or maybe articulating like, what are we doing? What are we aiming towards? And so that's the number one thing that comes up for me. Again, I don't have all the details, but like, what's the purpose of this organization? Are they articulating that to the employee population? That needs to happen before you even dive into like job descriptions, because people need to know where they're going, and organizations evolve, and you have to kind of go outside the boundaries of your job as well as you are expanding. So that's part of it. The PTO conversation is much broader than just vacation. What I'm hearing here is there was, it was a smaller company probably where you could just probably hire people that you knew around you. And so there was kind of this unspoken rule around how everything works in the organization, but that doesn't last long as you get bigger. So what does that actually mean? And if everybody is able to actually just focus on their role, they know what they're doing, then that's great, because you don't have to have as many rules around vacation. But that's missing. That's a missing element to start with. And the other piece is, now they're trying to put in some constraints because there's a lot of chaos happening because there isn't clarity in their system. But that's not the real problem. The PTO isn't actually the real problem. That's an after the fact thing. It's really about looking at purpose and creating an employee value proposition. And we can get into that.
Yeah, I think this is really, really common in terms of business problems, because often things manifest as like an issue with PTO, but there's an underlying reason why that is manifesting with PTO. And before I want to go to Lindsay, because I also feel like there's some like juicy operational stuff that's maybe happening over here. But I also realized that I did not introduce myself to the conversation. I just like kicked it off. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Tracy Forreston. I am wearing the marketing hat and facilitator hat for today. But let's talk about the operations, because there also seems to be like a lot of departments reporting into this person, Lindsay.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. I'm Lindsay Sheldrake, and I am the operations expert on this call. That is my area of expertise and my focus and what I love. And really, I define operations as soon as you turn the things into doing. So that is why I'm going to say it becomes an operations issue, because ultimately, if I empathize for this, first of all, the COO. So the COO is accountable for integrating all of the business units together, and then obviously achieving like the goals, the objectives of the organization, whether it be quarterly, whether it be annually. So if I look at that, the unlimited PTO is a really hard place to navigate when you're trying to fulfill services, deliver on products, promises. So you think, as like Tim can attest to, but you sell a product or you sell a service, right? And if you have unlimited paid time off, what that can cause is uncertainty. So when it's a small company and you have five individuals, you can navigate that fairly easily. Text messaging, person sitting beside you, whatever it is, it can be a very like shared opportunity and problem. However, when you hit 50 staff, that's where it starts to get super complex, especially if you have collaboration, things like that. So Carolyn and I could, I think, totally like geek out about this, but there's also some things I just want to like throw in there on the side of unlimited paid time off. So this is the other side of this, and I'm going to be like kind of the Debbie Downer on this. there are certain things in an organization that are fixed costs, right? Like Tim, tech, right? You have users, whether the people are there or not. There's a cost to that. You maybe have an office. You have a sales team, which is part of your perceived overhead. So if you don't have that team, there is a lost opportunity cost. So that's where it adds complexity. I imagine why they're hiring 5 people by January is because they are still trying to fulfill on their promise, because they brought in all these employees. They've created an employee brand. They brought in all these employees. A lot of individuals want things like that, really big flexibility. And the last thing I'm just going to close off in, you can have flexibility. You just have to like put it in a box. Whether you have like a really long time before like you need notice on unlimited paid time off, high communications, willingness to like pivot and adapt as conditions change, because when you're going startup to scale up, things are massively changing. So the conditions are like live right beside you. So while paid unlimited time off worked a month ago, they may not work today. So the willingness to kind of like go back to the table and rediscuss that is super important. And Carolyn, I know you can grow on the lost opportunity cost side and the cost of business and stuff like that, which would be part of this as well.
Yeah. Okay, Lindsay, I love everything you said. Totally agree, right? So there's that opportunity cost piece. The alarm bells that started going off for me was hearing, okay, we're looking to hire 5 more people. We don't even have job descriptions. We don't even clearly know what they're going to do. And the issue sounds like an HR issue, and it certainly is. But I think what we've already been hearing is like, it's broader than HR, right? There's operational components. What I find is when it comes to finance, people forget about finance. So I should introduce myself as well. Carolyn Sissons, owner of Finance Learning Lab. So I'll be kind of providing the finance and accounting piece. And what I end up finding is if they're an ag tech business, what's really unclear here is how those 5 positions are going to be attributed to revenue. So anytime you're making any hiring decision, kind of assume a person that you're hiring, you're introducing largely fixed cost. And yeah, sure, there's severance, you could let people go, et cetera, but you're introducing pretty significant long-lasting cost into the business by bringing those in. And so before you hire anyone, I usually try to look at it through the lens of like, will this be a revenue generating role? Meaning you could actually determine a metric to say each new person you're bringing in, like more people equals more dollars, or is this going to be more of an enabling and support type role? And if it's enabling and support role, it can absolutely still be the right decision to hire it, but you have to proceed with a ton of caution because you're adding a lot of cost into the business without a clear line of sight on what that's going to do for your company's bottom line. So I'm usually of the view that like before you bring in any new person, you should be 100% clear on, is it a revenue role or is it an enabling support role? If it's an enabling support role, you better be extremely, extremely clear on how adding those costs is actually going to be beneficial to the company's bottom line. Because if it's not, sometimes people kind of fall into this default of saying, hey, add in new people, but you might want to look at like, how else can you accomplish what you're intending to have these people accomplish? So ag tech business, we don't know exactly what these people are going to be doing because we don't know job descriptions. So that's kind of a concern in and of itself. But Keith might actually even be able to add in to kind of say like, is there maybe a technology that could be explored to kind of say like, to what point is this person doing, you know, repetitive tasks or tasks that could be automated or tasks that you could kind of look at using a different technology rather than hiring a body to do what some of these 5 different people are bringing in. So my kind of lens on it is like, before you bring anyone in, categorize the role into one of those 2 buckets. And then if it really is an enabling support role, like explore all of your different options and all of your different alternatives before you kind of handcuff the company to added costs that really might not be well traced with the revenue coming in the door. Keith, what are your thoughts on that? Like, do you think companies sometimes miss looking more broadly at some of the tech options and just kind of default to like more people? Curious to hear your thoughts.
I agree 100%. Like, I feel like there's kind of 2 camps. There's the people that rush into the tech way too quickly because they feel like they just need it. And then there's the people that feel like they're drowning, and the only way that they can solve those challenges is by just bringing on more and more and more people. I think that it all goes back to, I think, what Vera had started with, which is that idea of clarity. What are we actually trying to do here? And, to your point, if you can define out, okay, well, these 5 people, maybe 4 of them are out in the world, they're knocking on doors, they're growing the business. If one of those people is really simply to fulfill the other 4 people, having clear understanding of the work they're doing, the impact it's having, and then what opportunity there is to have technology automate that, is super impactful. I don't want to necessarily, I guess we can dive into it right now, but even the HR app seems a little bit misplaced potentially in terms of how the organization has jumped into things, where it could be the opposite side of that, where you might just be looking to technology to solve a problem once again that you haven't really clearly defined, and buying a software, buying a platform with the hopes of it fixing a problem that you don't understand is another common challenge that actually just creates confusion, it creates complexity, and it muddies the water even further. And so I think that if there's one route that I'm hearing, it's the idea that we need to understand the challenge and where the business is trying to go and the things that they're actually trying to solve for before we can even suggest anything, because I think that's the actual thing that they're really struggling with. I don't know, Tim, you know this customer or this person well, or this organization well. Is that kind of hitting the nail on the head? What are you thinking about that?
I think it does, and there's a lot of threads that connect with everything that we've just shared on this, right? And when I see that the combination of roles that are reporting to the same person, they can be at conflict. And the way that operations can work in some organizations is very buttoned down, very procedure oriented. Sales isn't necessarily that way. And I talk a lot of times about riverbanks. At the start of a sales process, the riverbanks are very, very wide. And you might go A, B, C, or you might skip to step D and go back to B. And there's really no set procedure on that because you're building relationships, and those just take a different approach. As you get down into, like I say, the transaction execution, then you're tying to operations. Then things need to be a little bit more buttoned down and procedure oriented. And so it depends a lot on the type of sales that you're doing, which not everybody knows. There's different types of sales, and the roles you have within there. So it sounds like everything's combined into one role. Probably their business development, their key account management, and their sales admin is all falling into one role. That might not be their superpowers. And so you really got to think about, as this organization is growing, how do I split that up? How do I curate the right procedures with flexibility? So early on, I'm measuring differently than I am when I get down to transaction execution. And one of the key things I like to think about too with sales is measurement isn't always about the activity, it's about the results first. Is there a good pipeline? And if those are healthy, the person's doing the right thing in sales. And if those aren't healthy, then you dive into their appointment book, their calendar, their tasks, and see, are you doing the right things?
Can I chime in on just, I think one thing that came through and kind of near and dear to my heart was this individual who started as an individual contributor. And I actually had to ask him what that was because I didn't entirely know. But an individual contributor, for those that don't know, means you don't have anyone that reports directly to you. So I found that as a COO, I found that super interesting because if we look at a traditional organizational chart, the COO, sorry, is kind of at the base. If we talk about like the visionary or the founder of the brain is, and really the COO becomes that joint of the neck, right? And then everything filters through that. So let's make an assumption here. Let's assume that this individual came in as an independent contributor because maybe there wasn't a lot of people in the organization. Because if we think 6 years, I'm going to assume, high growth, gone up to 50 people. And when I think about that, a lot has changed, right? We talked a bit about clarity. So this leader, the COO, committed with clarity to a COO role as an independent contributor. There was some kind of like a lot of points about, how many direct reports was it, Tim, like that were not dotted?
6 direct reports, 10 dotted lines, and they're adding 5 people.
So are dotted lines by this definition, are they like their direct reports? There's like 2 layers, or dotted lines are, we're talking like they are consulted and informed by some of the decision making, but they're not actually accountable or responsible. I'm pulling in
I understand.
my racy matrix on this one.
It's partly they're responsible. So they're doing a little bit of day-to-day direction for these people, but they do report to someone else.
Okay. So just, thinking about that, there probably needs to be quite a lot more clarity. So historically, organizational charts were top down, right? You had the person at the top, you had the COO, and then you had the different departments heads. So as all of us sit here, we all experience that. A lot of organizations have gone to these more self-directed, entrepreneurial, everyone has a voice type of thing. What I'm going to say, again, like, with the paid time off, it's great to have flexibility, but with flexibility and autonomy, you need structure around it. So something like a RACI matrix is super important. So if you don't have this organizational chart that's super clear, like let's assume that they do. I mean, I hope they do. If they don't, that's like a great thing to start off when we talk about role clarity, role descriptions, organizational chart or map, whatever it is. It doesn't need to be like a top-down thing. And then who is accountable, who is responsible, who is consultant, who is informed. And keep in mind, no 2 people can be accountable for the same thing. Multiple individuals can be responsible, but one person, we have the statement of saying the buck stops here. That is true, because as we know, if 2 people are responsible, what happens? It often falls between, right? So that's why one person has to be in one box. One person can be in multiple boxes, but only one person can sit in one box. So that's just one thing I kind of want to clarify. A lot has changed. And when a fast growing company and a lot changes, as an individual in an organization, but also as a leader and a manager in this organization, you need to make sure that the conditions have changed, the context has changed. And that's why like quarterly conversations and going back to that intention of the purpose of the company, and then how have we built the operations and the infrastructure to serve that purpose. Does it make sense today? Maybe it made sense at 10, but 10 to 20 is massive. And then just to speak back to what Carolyn said, like you may bring on 5 resources that are billable or are part of your resource model, but Vered, you probably have some sort of bookends on this one. Like, what is the ideal contributor to manager ratio? So with 5 new individuals, like, is that leader now completely overwhelmed? So are you going to be looking at a second leader manager type of position? So there's a lot of things to unpack, and having that systems lens as well is super important, because everything affects, if I were to say to Tim, sorry, my operations can't handle all of this work, and Tim's solution may be hire 5 more people. We understand certain individuals on this call, the complexity of that, right? But we all have targets, we have goals, we're making promises outwardly, inwardly. So yeah, there's just a lot to consider. And that's why systems thinking, mapping it out, whiteboards, discussions with team, open communication is super important. But all back to that original pillar of clarity is super important to get that and alignment to that.
Absolutely. And I think absolutely, a lot of the things that were said today very much fitted to what is required from a system approach. There's some foundational elements that are question marks that are potentially missing in this organization. Where are their policies? Where's their employee value proposition? Do they have clarity on their purpose? And then the next part is around what Tim spoke to is process. So I actually think it's fine to have unlimited vacation policy, but what's the process around it? So if you're working in pods, how does that work? How does the approval process work? So it's not just, yes, you get unlimited vacation and you can take whatever you want. Let's rein that in, right? There's some boundaries around that. There's some rules around that. because we want to create an environment that's equitable and where it doesn't significantly impact compensation, so that there's this inequity because some person's getting 5 weeks off and their teammate has to pick up the slack and is only able to take 1 week off because it doesn't balance out. But the reality is we're in this. And so we're flying the ship and building it flying the plane, I guess, and building it at the same time. So how do we change? How do we shift now to a new environment? And, in my experience, I've actually done this quite a few times where it's an organization, they started off with 10, they want to provide all these great employee benefits, they have the right culture in place, and then they scale very rapidly. And there's not enough clarity in place through policy, through procedures, through process, through the right organizational design and leadership understanding what their roles are. And so then you have to take a step back, right? And then you have to go through that change process and think about, okay, well, what are we actually doing here? What awareness of the problem, and then what's the desire to change, right? So speaking to the leadership team and what do we need to do, and are we aligned? Because if we're not aligned, then we're not going to be able to meet that goal. And then really drilling down into that knowledge component. So educating around what's the new state of the union and where are we going to go. So all of those things also need to be in place. And I appreciate that. It's one thing to say we need to do X, Y, and Z and go through this process of brainstorming, but then what? How do we actually support that change through communication? And maybe, Tracy, I'm sure you supported a lot of those types of initiatives where there's a massive shift. And so how do we communicate where we're headed now?
Yeah, and that's an interesting point, Vera, because I think a lot of times the decisions are made behind closed doors. And it makes me think of the song in Hamilton, The Room Where It Happens, right? Like no one knows in there, right? It's just happening. And then we bring marketing to the table and be like, okay, well, now we have to communicate this change to the entire team. But team isn't at all aligned with this change through the process, right? So the acceptance or the ability for people to receive the communication is actually quite low. And we go again back to the doing of the thing. We send out the communication, we track how many people opened it, we do a lot of things, but it doesn't actually mean that people embrace the change, that people accept the change, that people are willing to do what they need to do to make that change live throughout the organization. And yet, while I'm not saying I don't believe it's possible to say let's get everyone's vote on everything, right? That's not reasonable. And especially once you get to the size, enterprise size, right? It's not possible. But I think there is a business mindset, or maybe we want to call it culture of being in conversation, being in communication, because that's different than sending out a team communication. These are two different things. And while the activity might actually be the same, the way of being higher up is different. And this is one of the big things that's coming up for me in this whole situation. And this might not be true. It might just be that the COO presented it to us. So my assumption is that it's been made the COO's responsibility to deal with these things. I think what we've explored here today is that looking at a solution or trying to create a solution in a silo is very complicated, right? And so if I'm the CEO and I say COO, just fix it, right? I don't want to think about it. I just want you to fix it. Just deal with it. You are not really enabling that person to come up with something that can be a solution. There's a benefit to having a broader strategic conversation about what benefit do these things have to the business, not what benefit does this have to operations, not what benefit does changing our HR technology have to HR. What's the benefit it brings to the organization? And if we're looking at that from that level, then I think once we get down to a communications perspective, we have all that clarity that pretty much everybody talked about, right? We have that clarity that we're communicating from, and it doesn't have to get layered in complex communication strategies and things like that. It's just, we're all very clear. We can all talk about this. You can ask questions about it and we can answer questions about it because we're very clear. And then we can go do stuff. And then I also think that the stuff to do often like manifests itself, right? Like it, because we have the clarity at that strategic level, the clarity of what to do. Do we need 5 people or do we need 4 people or do we need no people? We need technology, right? Like that, it feels like an easier conversation. So as we kind of morph this more strategic brainstorm conversation into what we can look at from some actionable items points of view, I think it's important to remember that if we skip the strategic part of the conversation, which for those of you who are listening took about 30 minutes, a little less, right? Like, but this doesn't have to be like 5 days out of office to explore these things, right? It can take a small amount of time if you intentionally use your time for those things. But I'd love to kind of go like roundtable based on this seeming can of worms that we've opened, and let's be real, right? This happens every day in a business environment. We seemingly open a can of worms. That doesn't necessarily mean that there's not things that we can very minimally test and try to address some of these problems. So is there anything that's like flashing in big red letters in anybody's brain that they'd like to go first in terms of like some action items?
I beat you. I beat you, Keith.
There you go. I'll let you go first, Larry.
It actually just goes off of what Tracy said. I'm going to say alignment at the executive level, because that is the most important thing. So I would advise this individual that making sure that if I think it's safe to say that there is a CEO, maybe there's co-CEOs, maybe there's founders, owners, presidents, that there is alignment, and this COO is not on their own. They are not the only person who is accountable to solve this problem. So I think going through all of these scenarios and talking about the things that need to be done, and then circling back to before you start doing to actually the intention and the purpose. I have this saying is intention plus focus plus action equals impact, but you got to do intention and focus first. There's a lot of things to do, but I think having that discussion with the CEO, who is your partner, to work through this stuff, to just see what we can accomplish, where should we go with this? So that's my biggest suggestion, is an alignment